And to do so, let's bring in our panel from our South Florida Newsmax newsroom, Javier Manjarres, the managing editor of the Shark Tank political blog, and checking in from Washington, D.C., the MoveOn.org Washington director and the host of The Good Fight, thus the slingshot logo behind him, a man who knows all about branding, Ben Wikler. Javier, first to you. Are the Cuban people better off today with this deal?
Well, first of all, let's talk about President Obama extending that hand he mentioned. What about the back of the hand he gave to the Cuban dissidents and Cuban exiles here in the United States? Look, the Cuban people have not been without anything. They've had everything they've needed, but the Cuban regime has failed to give them what they've needed because look, they trade with the rest of the world. They don't need the United States. This is just President Obama again, just showing us how weak of a president he is, and it sends a bad message. It sends a message that he believes he condones the atrocities that Castro's committed over the past 50 some odd years, and he supports his communist regime. That's all this is. This is a political ploy, and I think President Obama just wants to win another Nobel Peace Prize in the end.
Well, let's see what Ben has to say.
Well, I don't know if Javier has caught the news, but the Cold War is over and we won. This is a move that has the support of Cuban Americans. 68% of Cuban Americans say they support diplomatic relations with Cuba. And the important thing to remember is that an embassy, diplomatic relations with a country, is a telephone. Ronald Reagan didn't shut down the embassy in Moscow, and no one thinks that he was giving a gift to the Russians. This is something that President Obama is doing to advance our foreign policy objectives and do what's right for the country. I think it's
But in
great.
essence,
so what's next? North Korea? Are we going to put an embassy in North Korea?
Before we get to North Korea, here's the thing, Javier, and it does have to deal with the way we treat communist dictatorships. Right. In essence, has President Obama thrown a huge lifeline to Cuba? Because we understand there was about to be a cutoff from Venezuela, money, oil, all of that. And of course, Venezuela had really been the new donor state, if you will, to Cuba for so many years.
I don't buy it. I don't buy it because Cuba propped up Venezuela. They propped up Chavez. They propped up Maduro. Now they support him. They pretty much control the oil that comes in and out of Venezuela. Look, this is a sham. There's nothing wrong with happening in Cuba. They're having trade with the rest of them. My cousin has gone from Colombia to Cuba at least a dozen times in the past 10, 20 years. And so it happens. You can fly to Cuba from Canada. You can fly to Cuba from Mexico, wherever you want. And the dollars or the euros are still rolling into Canada. They don't into Cuba. They don't need U.S. dollars. This is again a slap in the face of the exile community.
All right. Well, again, let's get Ben's take on it. Ben.
We've had 10 presidents who didn't have relationships with Cuba, who didn't have diplomatic relations, and it has not gotten us where we're trying to go. So at some point, you might want to change course and do something.
But where do we want to go? Tell us, Ben, where do we want to go with Cuba?
We want a free, democratic, open, prosperous Cuba that respects human rights. I think we all want the same thing the Cuban people want. And the old way didn't work for 50 years.
Okay, so with this new deal,
that was not a good solution.
The
idea of trying something new at a certain point makes sense. Do you think we should wait 100 years before we try something different?
What has Cuba conceded to the rest of the world with this deal? What do they say they're going to do? They say they're going to allow free democratic elections? No, they haven't said anything. We've got nothing from them.
Here's the other problem, Ben. You know, you talk about wait another 100 years. Well, I don't think that either Raul or Fidel Castro are going to live past their 100th birthday. Time was on our side to see nature take its course. But I'll give you 15 seconds to respond, Ben.
Time is still on our side. The question is, when the Castro era ends, should the United States be part of the conversation about what's next, or should we be unilaterally cutting ourselves off from having any voice in this conversation? I think the answer to that's pretty clear.
Well, we waited out the Russians, and then we spent them to death. So
we
guess
talked
what?
to them all the way through.
Yeah, we also threatened them. They threatened us.
We also moved against them economically in very meaningful ways, depriving them of hard currency and gold and diamonds. Coming back to talk about more issues of importance with Ben Wikler and Javier Manjarres. You stay with us too now on America's Forum. Let's continue our conversation with Ben Wikler, Washington director of MoveOn.org, and Javier Manjarres, managing editor of the Shark Tank political blog. Ben, to you first. Is this a smart move for President Obama, given the specter of the 2016 elections? The reason I ask, when Castro sent Elian back to, Freudian slip. When Bill Clinton sent Elian Gonzalez back to Castro, the Cuban-American community moved 80% into the GOP column, which arguably helped George W. Bush in that very close election with Al Gore in 2000. So do you really think this is going to help the Democrats with the Cuban-Americans?
JD, the first thing is there's a generational shift that's taken place in the almost 20 years since that time. We're now looking at a younger generation of Cuban Americans that overwhelmingly favor diplomatic relations being opened with Cuba. It's 68% for the general Cuban American population. The numbers are even higher than that for younger people. So that's the first thing. The second thing is this is a president who's now been liberated from the day-to-day Washington spin cycle. Whoever the Democratic nominee is, unless it's Joe Biden, which I wouldn't put my money on, is not going to be someone who has to own the president's actions for this 2-year period. This is a president just totally focused on doing the best thing for the American people, and I love seeing it.
Javier, is that true? There won't be any repercussions for the Democrats? This president has been, quote, liberated?
Who's going to step up? Is it Hillary? Is it Elizabeth Warren? Both of them are lockstep with his policies, his failed policies. And look, and back to what Ben said, I agree. There has been a generational shift in the Cuban exile community. You're talking 4, 5, 6 generations removed from the plight of the original exiles. A lot of these people these kids are more interested in the Jay-Z's going to Cuba than really caring about what happened, why there's exiles here in the United States. So he's right in that regard. One of the few times he's right, and I agree with him. But as far as the Democrats, who are they going to put up? Whoever they put up has in some way supported President Obama's failed agenda.
Well, in the 2 minutes we have before we get to 2016, a couple of years away, let's talk about the opening of the next Congress. The president waiting until this session of Congress was completed to make this announcement. Is he, in essence, picking yet another fight with the Republican Congress? Javier, first to you.
Of course he is. This is not a coincidence. He's picking a fight, and what he wants to do is put it all onus on the Republicans. If they push back on his agenda, the more they push back, the more it looks like they're not willing to work in a bipartisan fashion. Whereas that's exactly what he did for the past 6 years. When he controlled the entire Congress, he didn't work with Republicans. He still doesn't work with Republicans. Even when they control the House, he refuses to work or refuse to work with Republicans. That's all this is.
Ben, you said the president has been liberated as part of that liberated feeling. Hey, let's just pick some fights with the Republicans in charge of the House and Senate.
I think this liberated feeling is let's figure out what the right thing to do is and then do it. And I think that if you want to look for a party where foreign policy is going to be an issue in 2016, look at the Republicans. That's a fissure there that could turn into an earthquake. Bush versus Rand Paul is a civil war that I think America is going to watch with a lot of fascination and a lot of popcorn.
It won't be Rand Paul.
Well, it may not be Jeb Bush either, or
right.
Certainly a lot of other candidates. And of course, on the record, Ben's dressed up today. He's not wearing his Elizabeth Warren t-shirt as he promotes his own schism within the Democratic Party. But looks like, Ben, you've got on your crow. He's going to pull down and show us he's got his Warren button.
God.
Getting ready for, but that's not Massachusetts, that's Iowa. They're getting ready for the caucuses. All right, we'll see about that. We'll monitor the 2016 sweepstakes. Gentlemen, to you both, thank you very, very much for your time. Always an animated and passionate discussion from Ben Wikler and Javier Manjarres. And when we come back, the way I see